Welcome to Reach, your platform to connect with other executive assistants and acquire game-changing knowledge and perspective. Reach is designed to inspire your workday, guide you through pivotal moments in your career, and transform you into the executive assistant you've always wanted to be. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Reach. This is your host, Jessica Mann. I'm the founder and CEO of Maven Recruiting Group, and I have Nicky Christmas in the studio with us today. Welcome, Nicky.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. And I'm going to apologize in advance, Nicky, if I start to co-opt your accent through the course of today's conversation. I have a bizarre tendency of doing that, and it doesn't matter what the accent is, so...
I'm so pleased you've said that because I do exactly the same thing. So
perfect.
It's normally with Australians is the worst, right? But
yeah. So if you want to pretend to be American, I can pretend to be British today. We could totally role reverse. It would be really fun. So, as I mentioned, we have Nicky in the studio with us. Nicky is the founder of EA Campus, which is a globally recognized voice in the executive support space. Nicky has built her career around elevating the role of the executive assistant and really helping executive assistants to see beyond just pure task execution and really viewing themselves as a true strategic partner and ally. So through her work with EA Campus, she has worked with thousands of executive assistants across the globe, equipping them with the mindset, the frameworks, and I think ultimately really the confidence to operate at a higher level. What makes Nicky's perspective particularly valuable is your focus on the realities of the role, which aren't always written down or formally taught, right? And there's a lot, as we all know, of nuance and split-second decision-making and judgment calls and moments where there's not necessarily a clear right answer. And that's exactly what we're going to be digging into today is how you think about those moments, Nicky, and how you really counsel and advise executive assistants to work through those moments. So the truth is, there's a difference between a good EA and a truly trusted operator. And it often comes down to how you perform in those gray moments. So what do you do when there's no playbook? What do you do when there's no explicit direction, no time to ask for permission? How do you make these critical, sometimes seemingly life or death decisions, and how far is too far? All of that good stuff is what we'll be focusing on today. So that being said, let's start at the beginning. Walk us through your career journey as an executive assistant and ultimately becoming and forming this alliance of EAs with EA Campus.
Oh, well, thank you so much for the introduction. I can't wait to dive into this topic. It's something that we talk about a lot in the EA Campus, and it's exactly as you said, we work in the grey. So I'm really looking forward to diving into decision making and confidence and all of that good stuff. I started as an executive assistant. I'm just about to age myself, but I had my first executive assistant role in 2003. I finished university and moved straight into a role at Deloitte, where I worked initially as an administrator, and then moved into an executive assistant role from there. And then from there, I worked in various industries, insurance, law firms, lots of different places, all within the city of London. And while I was there, I found that there wasn't a huge amount online in particular for EAs, and I had a real interest in building learning how to build websites and maybe doing some more writing. I'd been doing that at university and I really enjoyed it. So between wanting to sort of learn some new skills and flex some of my writing skills, I started created a blog called Practically Perfect PA, where I would share, because I could do it in my work time. I was in a role that was slightly less challenging than other roles I had. I thought I want to do something while I'm at work, which work wouldn't think was a bad thing. So I started writing this blog and how to, work as an EA, some tips and tricks that I'd picked up over the 10 years that I'd been doing it. And then very quickly it snowballed into what then became a blog, Practically Perfect PA, which then became a business. And then in last year we rebranded and we're now the EA Campus. And I've been doing this for 15 years. So if you do the math, it all works out. It's been quite some time.
Wow, that's incredible. So it sounds like you had a lot of, you really tapped into a lot of early adopters and people who were just thirsting for direction on this very subject.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because in the UK particularly, there wasn't a huge amount available in terms of training or resource. There wasn't very much online. There was in the States, and a lot of us were looking at the websites there. But in the UK, there was a tendency for anything related to executive assistants to be anonymous. So there were a lot of things around maybe the more glamorous side of being an EA. Particularly in London, there was a few columns and things like that in career newsletters or websites where it was a bit more of a glamorous take on the role, or it was about organising events, or it was about attending events where you would go for free and check out the venue or go to the restaurant. But there wasn't anything specifically around the skill set of an executive assistant. So in the UK, it was very much at the forefront of that, particularly with it being online and the website being in that blog format, which was popular at the time. And yes, I put my name to it. I wasn't anonymous. It was coming from me.
Yeah. No, I remember the blogging days. It was the thing. For sure.
It was a thing.
To have your own. Yeah, it was definitely a thing. So with your work, or through your work rather, with executive assistants around the world, what sorts of patterns have you seen emerge when it comes to confidence and decision making in the role? And I guess more specifically, if you could think about some of the tangible examples where you see decision making coming up and what it means to exhibit confidence in those moments and decisions.
It's something that we've been teaching for years, confidence in particular. We've been running training, conferences, events, all types of things, as I said, for 15 years. And I always include a session on confidence building. I always say to anybody who's part of the EA campus, if we can just increase your confidence by 10, 15, 20%, you'll fly. It's a skill or an area that I see so often with EAs. They are so capable, and it's the confidence piece that we really need to work on. And it's for a whole number of factors. It's one of the reasons a lot of us end up becoming executive assistants is probably a little bit of a lack of confidence in taking our career in other directions. It could be that we've had negative things said about what we do as a career, and it's put us back a little bit. It may be that we've not been given sort of the permission to be confident. So it's something that I talk about it and train on a lot. And then I think the decision-making piece comes when confidence increases. So I always say most EAs know the answer to everything that they are asked to do or any decisions that they have to make. But we pause sometimes because of a lack of confidence or a worry that the decision that we're going to make is wrong. So it kind of goes hand in hand. You tend to find the more confident an EA, the easier it is for the decisions to be made.
That certainly tracks. I think that tracks just in life in general, right? I mean, somebody who has a strong inner compass and inner sense of self is typically more easily finds those crossroad moments a little bit easier to navigate. But I do want to poke back a little bit on something you said about how sometimes it's a lack of confidence that results in why people choose this profession in the first place. And I actually would beg to differ on that one. I think that I see a spectrum, right? I see 100 million%. Yes, there are EAs who are low on the confidence scale. And I also see executive assistants who are some of the most confident people I have ever met in my life period, who can own any boardroom with the likes of, you name it, right? Top-notch executives. So I don't think it's a lack of confidence that is what draws people to this profession, but I do agree with you that I think there are a number of people in this profession who don't necessarily have tons of confidence. So I guess thinking about that, because that also seems like a tricky one for me, right? Because where does confidence come from? I mean, there's so many answers to that question, and a lot of which would predate, anyone's time in the EA seat, right? We're talking about childhood. We're talking about all kinds of things that impact one's ability to be confident. So how do you address that? I mean, some of it seems like a lot of it would be just inherited baggage. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think that's completely true. And I think it also comes from things that have happened to you. So you can be really confident and then somebody could say something, knock your confidence, and then it just takes a little bit of time to rebuild. I always say, I think confidence is like a muscle. So a lot of us kind of say, I'm not a confident person, or I'm shy. And then maybe the shyness somehow gets mixed up with a lack of confidence. I'm an introvert. Those kind of, those sort of personality traits can get mixed up with a lack of confidence. And I don't necessarily think that's the case. I always say, I think confidence is like building a muscle. So you need to exercise it. And what you will find is the more you exercise it, the bigger it builds and the more confidence you have. And I think the best way to do that is to just start small. So I think one of the things we often hear is, you should step out of your comfort zone and then there'll be growth and, then you'll build your confidence. And I think a little bit of a switch with that is get really confident in your comfort zone, get really good at the things that you do frequently, that you can do well, and then from there you will find that your confidence will build, because you'll innately feel like, okay, I've got this, I've got all of the kind of fundamental aspects of the EA role down, and then I can start to look outside of that and move into different areas or take that next step in building your confidence. But I think it's like a muscle, and the more that you work it and just push yourself a little bit more and more, the more it will go. That's certainly what I found in my life and my career.
Right. I like that idea of starting small, and I think it makes it a little bit more discreet and manageable and finite, right? It's like, like anything, right? If you're not an experienced chef, are you going to start off by hosting a dinner party for 15 of your closest friends? Probably not, but you might offer to bring like a dish to a potluck, and just like have a mastery over something like that, and little by little, it builds, right?
Yeah, I mean, that would be an example of being overconfident, because I certainly can't cook. So
yeah, and I think like there are moments and I'm sure we'll get into that as our conversation continues, but there's little moments where you can insert yourself as an executive assistant, where maybe you're not driving the whole thing, but if you're someone that doesn't often use their voice, maybe you challenge yourself. I want to set a goal of giving my boss one bit of input this week or something, or speaking up about something that I think is a missed opportunity, and I want to challenge myself to find one opportunity to do that this week, right? Like little things that give you a little bit of opportunity to flex that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think exactly as you said, you don't have to go full out. Start small. Start with the things that you already know that you are capable of doing. And then even if you just start talking about them and being a little bit more visible in what you do on a day-to-day basis, again, that's going to build confidence. Just starting to talk about your achievements and things that you can do.
So when you think about the highest performing executive assistants out there, what are the qualities or experiences of those individuals that separate them and allow them to be more confident and to execute with more authority versus staying in more of that kind of permission-based mindset? So what do they have different qualities as people, or do they have different experiences that they bring to the table that gives them that oomph?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think from career performance background, what I would say is that they tend to have a really strong understanding of context. So what do I mean by that? It's going out and being proactive around what you want to know in the role. So not waiting to be told what you need to do, not waiting to be fed information, but to go out there and find the information that you need to then build the context around your role, where you fit into the organisation, where your executive fits into the organisation. It's that real proactivity, I think, that really makes a high-performing EA stand out. And then in terms of experience, I think it's working with people who really understand how valuable executive assistants are. I think those really high-performing EAs, 9 times out of 10 will say they've worked with an excellent leader who understands their role and the value that they can bring and has challenged them and pushed them forward for things. And also working in organisations and teams that, again, value what they do and what EAs can bring to the table.
So why do so many EAs, do you think, default to asking first or asking for permission? And what do you think is the cumulative effect of that practice in terms of how the executive views and perceives that assistant?
I think it comes from a place of caring. I think, first of all, and I'll break that down in 2 ways. So EAs really, again, from experience, from what I found with EAs, they really care about their work, more so than so many other professions that I've come across. They want to do really well. They really care about doing a good job for their executive. And they want to get everything right. You will often hear an EA say that they're a perfectionist. And I've heard so many EAs in interviews say that that's a quality that's good, and that should be rewarded. And I often say, if you're a perfectionist, it's really hard to make decisions because you're so fundamentally worried that the decision that you're going to make is wrong. And, you're less likely then to make the decision without a lot of back and forth. But I think the perfectionism part also comes from that just really caring about the results and wanting to do a good job. So I think it's right. That's right. And then the second part of that, I think there is a lot of pressure on EAs to get things right. There's so many things you'll see on, job descriptions, LinkedIn, where the EA is the fountain of all knowledge. An EA has to know everything. They can't get anything wrong. Everything has to be 100% immaculate. And yes, what you deliver has to be at a high level. I think that's absolutely right. But it doesn't leave much space for things to go wrong. And again, I think EAs will come in and struggle to get over that barrier, and it comes with confidence, it comes with experience. But yeah, I think it puts us in a difficult position to make decisions because we can be so worried that we aren't going to get that decision right. Right. In terms of, in terms of the cumulative effect, what you will tend to see is the EA will constantly check. So it will be they'll make a decision, but they'll just want to check it's the right decision. That could be with the executive or with a colleague or team members, maybe someone who's adjacent to the executive, and it just starts to slow the work down. And as I said at the beginning of the interview, 9 times out of 10, an EA will get the decision right. And it's just learning that, okay, that decision was right. Okay, next time that comes up, I won't ask. I'll just do it. But again, it just slows everything down. And again, the EA will most likely go back to the executive to sense check and just make sure they're on the right track. And it's just slowing the process down. Right. Sometimes the decisions that are being made don't need to be checked with the executive. So it's being aware of which ones do and which ones don't, where they can proceed and where they do need to just get that, check in with their executive.
Absolutely. And I know we're going to talk about that as far as kind of what are generally areas that are the domain of the EA and they should feel comfortable to operate independently on versus where it might be advisable to double check. But I think too, like from my perspective of working with executives, I would struggle to come up with too many examples of executives who want to be deluged with overtures and requests for permission or input. I mean, if anything, the number one, probably most heard comment that we get from our executive and founder clients is that they want somebody who can operate in a vacuum of input and with minimal direction, fully proactive, and who's capable of operating autonomously, because there is such a thing as decision-making fatigue, and these executives are deluged with questions and big, heavy, thoughtful, catastrophic types of things that they have to consider all day long. And so then when you hit them with, well, so are you going to want to have offer tea and coffee after this lunch meeting, or should we just go straight to whatever? Like, those are not decisions that they want to be tasked with. And I'm just picking something very trivial off the top of my head, but it's not having to route more things through them. That is the value of having an executive assistant, is that person to buffer and protect from decision fatigue. So I'd be curious kind of if that's also been your experience in speaking with the executive side of the fence, if that's a theme that you also have heard.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a business owner, I couldn't agree with you more. There is so many decisions that have to be made in a day. It's a relief when someone comes to you and says, I've done this. And even if it wasn't quite how you were going to do it, the fact that it's done is just a major win. It's a major win. And it just, as I said, it might be that the exec would then come back and say, next time, this is my preference. Can you just alter this bit? Unless you're working with somebody that is an extreme micromanager or a difficult personality, which sure. I know some EAs who listen to this will be, 9 times out of 10, the executive will just be relieved it's done, because work mm-hmm. moves so fast. As you said, there's just a mm-hmm. deluge of decisions that need to be made. If you mm-hmm. are the person taking decisions off of your executive plate, 9 times out of 10, they will just thank you and go on to the next thing.
Yeah, I agree with that very much so. It's funny, I was taking my children to school this morning, and I started my day, as I often do, with speaking with my assistant. And she, it was a quick 25-second conversation, just quickly a line. Okay, great, got it. Moving on to the next thing. And my son goes, is it really nice having an executive assistant?
The answer is yes.
And I said, the answer is a resounding yes. Yes, and yes. It's the best ever. Yeah, it's the best ever.
Yeah.
So you shared a mantra, or you have shared a mantra, that it's better to proceed until apprehended, which, I take as very much like it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission, right? So proceed until apprehended. What does that look like in practice for an EA, especially if you are someone who is newer in their role or hesitant and worried about overstepping?
Yeah, it was from a speaker we had years ago who did a session on it, and honestly the room was just so engaged. I think a lot of people hadn't really thought like that before, and she was so funny and engaging. I just thought, I'm going to keep this mantra for the rest of my life, because you get away with a lot when you proceed until apprehended. You'll be surprised. Yes. So I really like to give an example here, which is from another EA thought leader, a lady called Candice Birmingham, who's based in Sydney, and she gave a really good example of how this sort of worked in an EA role. So she just started as an EA in a company, and she'd watched all of the TV shows, about what an executive assistant does. And in her first role, she just walked into the executive meeting. It was a board meeting, and she sat down because she just assumed that EAs attended meetings.
Right.
So when she was in there, nobody said anything. So then she turned up at the next meeting and the next meeting, until another EA said to her, how have you got into all of these meetings? And she said, I thought I was supposed to go to them. And I just thought it was she just walked in the room. No one said anything. Her executive sort of quite quickly cottoned on that she was quite useful in the meeting. And nobody ever discussed it. So I thought that was such a good example of not quite knowing it, but proceeding until apprehended. And what I thought was really nice about that example was that what she wasn't doing was letting anybody define what the executive assistant role meant to her. And I think quite a lot of EAs can do that. So we've all got in our head when we first start this career of what an EA is going to be and what I'm going to do as an EA. And I think sometimes over time you can let the executive that you work with define it for you, a bad word from a colleague or a team member define it for you, or actually the opposite of that, you work with people who are excellent and then they define the role for you. And I think sometimes we forget that we should be defining the role for ourselves, what we want to be as an EA, what we want to accomplish, what our goals are. And that's sort of what I mean by proceed until apprehended. Don't let anybody define you, your career, or what this role is, because it's such a vast role and there are so many different aspects to it. So that's what I sort of ultimately mean by that. That's what I think that looks like on a day-to-day.
Yeah, I love that. And there's a ton of latitude in how EAs, one, define themselves, but also how executives and the people around them define the role. And so I agree. You really do have oftentimes the ability to chart your own course in this position.
Yeah.
So for EAs who are listening to you today, Nicky, and they're thinking, okay, but I've tried that, and I've tried taking initiative. I mean, I walked into that boardroom too, and I sat down like I belonged, and they told me to leave or whatever, right? Yeah. And they've had those things where they feel that they've put themselves out there and they've sort of had their hand slapped. So how do you advise in situations like that, and what is the path forward if you've sort of had been shot down or had retribution? How do you move through that?
Yeah, and it does happen. I mean, it's happened to me. I've walked into board meetings and been told, could I go and get the biscuits, or can I just go and refresh the teas and coffees? And it's horrible. It's not a nice position to be in, especially when you know you can add so much value. Again, I go back to what I've said. Don't let anybody decide what you want to be or what the role should look like. I think I've co-opted this from somebody else as well, but there's a saying, don't listen to the opinions of people that you wouldn't seek advice from. So I think that's always, again, really important in the EA role. A lot of people don't know the value that we add. So if they don't understand the EA role, it's not for us to be worried about what their opinion is. But I know that is easier said than done. So I think it's a case of going in initially, particularly if you are in a new role or you're new to the EA role, and have that confidence that the EA role is incredibly valuable. As you said, there's a huge amount of scope and there's a lot of things you can do. So throw yourself into it. And then if you are anxious or you do have had a few comments that have knocked your confidence, it's generally a case of rebuilding again. So go back to the fundamental aspects of the role. What are you really good at? What's inside your sort of comfort zone where you know you can add a lot of value? Where can you start with that sort of low risk, familiar, either decision making that you need to do or tasks that you want to take on, and build from there. There will always be people who are on the flip side of anything negative that will be really positive about what you do. So I know it can be really easy to take a negative comment or somebody saying something and it completely knock you, but keep a file of all of those times people have said what you've done is excellent, or when you know you've added value, go back and read them, go back and look at them and remind yourself that you are capable and that this one personal, this situation that's happened to you is not defining who you are as an EA, and it should in no way do that.
Yeah. And there is, this theme of resiliency, which is also, I would argue, a muscle that has to be developed and continuously exercised, because it's life and there are all of these moments. And I think that this is some of the things that we try to encourage as parents, right? And as employers and as business people and as colleagues and really just across the board, is that there's always going to be that test, and there's always going to be a recovery moment, and they go hand in hand. You know, the retribution or the hand slapping goes hand in hand with the recovery, and how you kind of pick yourself up and plow forward. And I don't know like an antidote for that. It is, and you just have to kind of continuously do it and not let it get the better of you. It's
that skill that makes EAs really good in a crisis, because we are really resilient. And I think most of us have got stories of when somebody said something that's, you know, been difficult or judgmental, or, you know, particularly quite often in a room full of other people it can happen. But as I said, exactly as you said there, that makes you more resilient, and that skill is so important when there's a crisis or everybody is, you know, in crisis mode. You will tend to be, and you two tend to find EAs are the calmest people in the room who can just plow through and get things done. So it's not nice when these things happen, but exactly as you said, it's character building, if nothing else.
It is. So we hinted at this a little bit earlier, and I want to circle back to it about how we think about the decision-making landscape of an executive assistant, and if we think about how we carve that up into sort of what are the jurisdictions that the EA has and should feel confident and comfortable with having dominion over and jurisdiction over, versus what are some of the areas that are maybe a little bit more nebulous, and what are the things that should just probably not be handled by the EA, but should be just escalated and routed to the executive. How do you think about that decision-making landscape?
I think it really depends on the executive. So I know that's it's a bit of a grey answer, but it really does depend on what your executive expects from you and the role and what you've been brought in to do. I've just written a blog actually on what it's like to work with executives across different generations, and you do tend to find that certain executives, and also it's not just a generational thing, it might be an industry thing, but they do want and need different things from their EAs. So I've worked with EAs before where I spent years saying, you know, your executives should never touch their calendar, they should never look at their emails, that should just be something you do. And I kind of still think that to a certain extent, but there are a lot of executives who like to have some oversight of their emails, or like to have some autonomy around their calendar, and that's okay. Now, as I said, a few years ago I used to say it's not okay, but now, you know, with AI coming in, these things actually move at a much quicker pace. So you can get maybe your executive involved if they want to be. So first of all, I think you have to set the expectations with your executive. I think that's the most important thing. Have that conversation and make sure you do carve out things that are specifically yours, specifically theirs, and then some sort of way that you are able to filter anything that sits in the grey. So when something comes up that is in that grey zone, go back, have the conversation. Is this yours? Is this mine? And then go from there. But in terms of carving up the decision landscape, it has to start with that kind of setting expectations and then constantly communicating with each other, because there'll be things that come up that you've never had to make a decision on before. So it's having that communication plan in place of, okay, so when something comes up, which ways do we communicate with each other so the decision gets made quickly and effectively, so then we can move on and get on to the next thing. So as I said, I think there are clear ownership areas if you sit in or work with an executive that's maybe a little bit more formal or a bit more of a traditional role, and that's absolutely emails, calendar, task management, and then generally speaking, in those more traditional roles, sort of high risk decisions should ultimately sit with your executive. Anything business, you know, strategic level should sit with your executive, and there should be clear boundaries there. But what I'm tending to see, and I'd love to get your sense on this, a lot of executives now aren't really working in that traditional way. A lot of them do have autonomy over a lot of their work, and actually they're using their EAs much more for project work or understanding the way that technology is moving, or having conversations around other areas that maybe weren't in those traditional roles I would have been talking about a few years ago.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, I think, as you suggested, it does still often depend on the industry and that industry's expectations of, what their needs are and how they like to function. But I would say, especially where we work, which is largely in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, which is, not surprisingly a huge hub of activity for startups and founders and technology companies. And so I think in general, those industries tend to function a little less traditionally. And yes, there is a heavy amount of calendar management. Don't get me wrong on that. But I think that there's also a lot of lift that comes with working cross-functionally and, working within teams and helping to drive projects and, champion initiatives and onboard other executives and help, leverage time and create structure for agendas. So there's like a lot more kind of project savviness that tends to come into roles like that. That's beyond to kind of the more like when you think about traditional work. So yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think one thing that causes friction for a lot of EAs is just like, so going back to the decision-making thing, is like identifying those critical moments, right? So for example, like, when do you interrupt? When do you insert yourself? Like, when is something crisis level, emergency level? Because it is a bold move, right? If an executive has said, I am unreachable for the next 3 hours, or I'm in a leadership offsite, or I'm in this, client meeting, or I have this meeting with this LP and I'm unavailable, and they've made that abundantly clear, and then something happens and you are faced with this split second moment of, okay, is this worthy of inserting myself and interrupting them or not? Like, I think about, I've had situations like that come up, and certainly people that support very high profile people, they're, whatever they have planned for the day may or may not unfold as they are anticipating. And I think more often than not, there's things that inject themselves and just hijack the day, right? So I think all the more likely in situations like that you're going to be confronted with that decision. So, I mean, how do you think about that? Like, when do you violate the do not contact, order and make contact?
Yeah. Oh, it's grim, isn't it? I can just kind of start to feel, I've been in those situations. It's horrible.
Yeah, it's scary. It's intimidating. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember having to walk into board meetings with a little post-it note, back when I was an EA, sort of putting it on the desk, everyone looking at you, and then sort of slowly sneaking off. Right. And just waiting outside the door while your executive may or may not come out. 20 sets of eyeballs are like, why did Nicky barge in? Yeah. Oh, it's horrible. So no, I completely understand it. I think there's a few things there. So confidence plays a huge part in this. And also the other side of that is the relationship that you have with your executive. So we all work, I'm sure many EAs have worked with executives. They're a little bit scary, and you never quite break the barrier of that. They're the executive, you're the EA. It's a very set relationship. It's really difficult when you're working with that kind of executive to kind of go against what they've asked of you, but you've done it with the right intentions. There are a lot of us now, again, with how, executives are now, where there is a bit more of a personal relationship. And again, you can have that conversation. You've said, do not disturb. If something really important comes up, how much of that do not disturb do you actually mean? If you're working with somebody that's a good executive and a nice person, and you walk in and you shouldn't have disturbed them, but you were doing your best, you thought it was important, the repercussions of that are you've cared about what's going to happen, you've cared about the business, and you think you've made the right decision. Most executives would understand that and would understand where you were coming from. Now, of course, that, as I said, that's not always the case, and those decisions sometimes can come back with somebody, saying something, or, a grumpy reply, or maybe calling you out if you have disturbed a meeting. Again, I've been there. I think a lot of VAs have been there. That's where resilience really builds, because and also you've made a mistake. You're going to grow from it. You're not going to do it again. The other thing I would say is with a lot of decisions, it comes with exposure. So until you've made the decision and you've done something and then seen how that decision plays out, you're not going to know if it was the right decision or wrong decision. So you kind of have to make those decisions and make those judgment calls so you know whether or not it was the right thing to do. There quite often isn't we can't see into the future. There isn't, a way of seeing whether or not those decisions are going to land until you make them. So obviously sometimes you've got to do that. And the decision will tend to be right if you've built that rapport with your executive and you know them a little bit more, but also if you know the business priorities. So if something comes up and you've been told you've got to go and interrupt your executive or phone them while they're on vacation or whatever it happens to be, if you are very much aware of the priorities of your executive, the goals of the business, then again you'll have a better understanding of if you need to, or can you pass it on to one of their direct reports, or can your team work on it without having to disturb your executive. So there's a few things there you can do, but absolutely I've been there. It's not the best situation to be in, but unfortunately it's something most EAs will face at some point.
It's inevitable. Yeah. And I like your invitation to really get familiar with the context and know the landscape, right? Because I think about things like, so many of our assistants, they work for executives who are, very much involved in the business development function, right? Or customer acquisition. And so if you are aware of the prospects that are high value, high potential, who's kind of your executive is courting, who's a really sensitive, timely deal potential, intuitively that those are things that you may want to, move on if something crosses the inbox while your executive has been in a do not disturb moment, right? Those are things that you're privy to that okay, this is actually sensitive versus what balls are rubber, what balls are glass, what can I drop versus what can't I? And I think it really is absolutely incumbent upon executive assistants to know what those moments are. Same thing, you support a venture capitalist, you should know who are they trying to get term sheets done with, and which of these portfolio company CEOs is really important to them and high stakes versus which ones are they not actively courting, right? I mean, anything like that, it's your duty to know that and to fully understand their landscape. And yes, that is hard. There's a lot to that. You're learning literally a whole landscape. But that's, I think, the way to be flawless and to really be able to execute with confidence. Again, not your word, but without information, without context, I think it's really hard to be confident.
Yeah. And you need your executive to let you in. The flip side of that is, as an EA, you need your executive to let you in and keep you in the loop and share that context with you, because you can go off and learn these things yourself. And, we've spoke about that already. You do have to spend a lot of time building your business acumen in the industry that you work in. And it's not easy. It takes up a lot of time, especially when you work in a busy role. You have to carve out the time to learn. But you do also have to have an executive who lets you in. It's really hard to do any of the things that you've just said there if you've got an executive who just expects you to know these things and gives you no context.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. And I think that often, unfortunately, is what is expected of EAs, is to be sort of this all-knowing oracle of information without necessarily having been brought up to speed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's a nice segue to, a conversation around really understanding your executive. And clearly your superpower as an EA is rooted in your knowledge of this person and, how they make decisions, what level of risk are they willing to tolerate, what level of uncertainty are they willing to tolerate, how would they function themselves if they were in XYZ situation, so that by extension, you can begin to think about how you would behave in those moments. So, I mean, how do you encourage EAs to build that knowledge base is there, do they interview their executive? Do they have literally a bank of, a profile of their executive? How do you encourage them to become this all-knowing executive assistant?
Yeah, all of those things. So I recommend that when you start with a new executive, you build an executive manual where you go to them and build effectively an instruction manual on how they work. And we've got a template on the EA campus that you can use to put that together, and it's in depth. Really goes into the amount of information you need to know about your executive. And then we also suggest you then share that instruction manual with the rest of their team, and then get the rest of their team to write instruction manuals. So yeah, there's so many things you can do. First thing I say is read everything. Everything that crosses your executive's desk, their emails, their Slack messages, their sent items. You're not being nosy. It can feel like you are, but this is how you get to know them. And if you can, attend the meetings that they go to. If not, get their notes so you can see what they've been focusing on in the meeting compared to what the agenda was. If you can get a transcript of the meeting, if you can't attend, that's really valuable. So you have to take it on as a project. You have to go into absolute observation mode. If it's early days with the executive, it's literally observe everything. If you're a little bit more of a seasoned EA, then I think, there's a lot that you'll take from the executives that you've probably previously worked with. But what I would always say is observe what gets prioritized, observe what gets pushed back, observe what your executive gets frustrated by, what they love, the people that fill them up compared to the people, when they come out of the meeting and they're cranky. Just observe everything as much as you can, when they have their dips in the day, when they're most energized, who they trust, who they don't. There's so many things you can pick up just by watching. Not in a sort of really full-on way, but in a very much in a, just keep an eye on who they are and how they operate. And from there, EAs, I tend to find their intuition is very good. So you will pick up on things, and through that sort of strategic observation, you will start to see what they want in who they work with well and who they don't, and how you would then fit into that, so you can slightly change how you approach things to reflect them and reflect their style. So that is, I know it's difficult when you're in a really fast-paced environment and there is a lot going on, but you have to carve out the time to do it.
I think I love the idea of a executive instruction manual. I think that's a brilliant
like a refrigerator
tip. Page 633. Yeah. It's a lot to be like, God, I just thought the fridge was for keeping milk cold. I had no idea. When did refrigerators become so complicated? But a lot of what you say makes 100% sense. A lot of it is pattern recognition. And I like the things that you mentioned about, are there certain people that tend to deflate them? Are there certain people that tend to energize them? Who do they always make time for? Who do they not make time for? I mean, all of this is patterning, right? And so you begin to kind of create a system and a framework for interpreting your executive and how they operate. I want to touch a little bit on recovery. So we've talked about making decisions, being bold, small wins, building confidence, flexing the muscle, all that good stuff. And then inevitably you screw up.
Yeah.
So what does strong recovery look like in a moment like that?
I always say take a beat. First of all, I've done it. I made some horrendous mistakes as an executive assistant, including giving 2 different groups of executives Wimbledon tennis tickets and then having to go to one set of executives and say they hadn't got them, which was a big deal, big deal. They brought clients, it had all been organised. It was awful. We only had a set number of tickets. So I rushed out of the office when I met a friend over lunch, cried, came back, dealt with the situation. But it happens to every single EA. It's so fast paced. There is so much pressure. So you're going to make mistakes. So unfortunately, it's where growth happens, which is horrible. It would be so nice if growth happened sitting on the sofa watching Netflix, but it doesn't. It happens when you tend to go outside your comfort zone or make a mistake and have to learn from it. So it's not nice, but it's inevitable, as you said. So some of the things that you can do is, if you do make a mistake, figure it out very quickly how you're going to rectify it and come with a solution. What I would say is most things you get wrong or mistakes you make, we're not performing brain surgery, so they can be resolved. If you work with an understanding executive, I would get in front of them very quickly and explain what happened and how you're going to fix it, or even better, have already fixed it or come up with a solution or a workaround before you go and have that conversation with them. If it is a big mistake, again, it's worth communicating it as quickly as possible so that you can either work together to resolve it. Many mistakes that you make, they're going to be reversible, or you're going to be able to adjust slightly or offer an alternative solution. So you need to be pretty quick on your feet. I would say the worst thing you can do is bury your head in the sand and pretend it didn't happen, because most of us work with very intelligent people, very detail driven executives who will know, and if they haven't mentioned it, they still know you've not got away with it. So better to own up, say, apologize and fix the mistake as quickly as possible. Difficult.
And I also heard, and come with a solution.
Yeah.
I think, that's a big one, right? I mean, it's not just about owning the mistake, but it's also about how are we going to rectify it, and not putting the burden of that on the executive.
Yeah, or blame anyone else. Again, it doesn't look good. Yeah.
No, it's not a good look. Do you still think that an imperfect attempt is better than inaction at all?
It depends on what the decision is, I suppose. But yeah, I think so. I think so, because as we've been talking about a lot, business moves really fast. Decisions need to be made. And if they don't and things stall, I think one of the huge problems, again, just in business in general, is that people don't tend to complete the thing that they were going to do. So there tends to be a lot of half-finished projects, half-finished tasks. So if you as an EA can be somebody who gets stuff done, makes decisions, moves projects forward, circulates the information that needs to be circulated, you are going to be a huge value to your organisation. But what tends to come with working at that pace is that things will go wrong, or they're not the perfect process or the perfect decision. But it moved on, things moved forward. And I think that's more important than things stalling because a decision wasn't made.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that one. So, Nicky, for those of our listeners who've gotten a taste of you today but want more, what are some of the resources that you have available? I know that you produce an annual summit or conference. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, and what are some of the other things that you have going on, and how people can connect with you?
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. So we're at the eacampus.com. We have a huge website which is free for everybody to access. And on there, you'll find a weekly article. We do a weekly podcast. We have lots of resources and templates on there that are all free. Hundreds of articles. It's from Practically Perfect PA through to the EA Campus. There's a lot of information on there. And then we also run masterclasses every month. A lot of AI training at the moment. A lot of training on Copilot and Gemini and ChatGPT. And we have a virtual summit every other month, which is a 24-hour event that's run over a 24-hour period. So it's wherever you are in the world, you can access that. And then we also have a conference coming up, which is in London over Admin Week, so the 22nd to the 24th of April. And that is our first in-person event since 2019. So we're very excited. We're keeping it to 100 people. Testing the water of getting back out there in London and the UK, but we also have online tickets available. So if anybody is interested in coming, we've got the program is up on the website now and tickets are available.
Well, that's amazing. Yeah, and you picked an amazing city to host in. What a great opportunity to, I mean, if you can go in person.
I mean, I would recommend it. London in April is, well, it's mixed. But it's gorgeous. It's a gorgeous city.
Definitely.
And we're on the event's on Great Portland Street, which is really central, just across the road from Regent's Park, which is stunning. So,
yeah. Lovely, as you say, as you British people say, lovely. All right. So to close us out, I have a final question for you, which is what we ask of all of our guests, which is, if you were operating as an executive assistant, who would you love to support, either past or present, and why?
Oh, this is such a tough question. This is really, really hard. So I had 3, and I've whittled it down to 1, and it's of a time and place. So I've gone with Madonna in the 80s. Because I just thought, what a ride.
Mm-hmm. Literally. Yeah. Yes. The stories you could tell.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Confidentiality, I think, would play an important part in that role.
Yeah, you think? So would you be a truth or dare kind of a person, Nicky?
Oh, I think I found a Madonna fan.
Yeah, that's great. Good answer. Yeah, very good answer. Well, it's been really a treat and lovely to connect with you. Thank you for spending time with us, and also for tackling a very ambiguous topic that I think really is a really defining challenge for this role. And I think it's one that is really critical to flush out and to really develop some acumen with. So thank you for your insights around this, and definitely encourage others to reach out to you directly if they'd like to explore this or other topics that you advise on. So thank you, Nicky.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Reach is brought to you by Maven Recruiting Group, who specializes in placing executive assistants and support staff to the Bay Area's most prominent executives and companies. If you've enjoyed being part of our podcast community and are interested in becoming part of our candidate community, we're currently hiring for roles in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, and Los Angeles. You can visit us at www.mavenrec.com to see some of the roles we're currently working on and to submit your resume.